Hi there. Today I will be demoing our new Bicep Experimental MCP server, recording this on August 11th, 2025. So here I have open a VS Code window. If you want to try the new experimental MCP server tools, you'll want to make sure you have the most recent version of VS Code installed and that you have the Bicep extension installed and up to date. So here you see I have an agent GitHub Copilot chat window open. So how I access this, starting from your regular VS Code window here, you'll go up to this GitHub Copilot chat icon in the top right, and then you'll see this chat window pop out. You'll see here that I've selected agent mode. There's also an ask mode where you can chat with the model, but agent mode will enable the model to write code for you directly in your code files. So here you can see this is our current file context, the demo test mcp.bicep file. So you can enable the current context to be this file. Before I hop into the demo, I will show you how you can see which MCP servers and tools you have configured. So you want to click on this Configure Tools button right here. And here I can see my list of MCP servers. And if I search for Bicep, I'll see the MCP server Bicep Experimental. And within that, I can drop down to see the tools that are part of this MCP server. So we shipped the experimental tools. We have 3 of them to begin with here: get AZ resource type schema, get Bicep best practices, and then if you hover, you can see a description of each of the tools, and then list AZ resource types for provider. I'll show you each of these tools in action with an example so you can understand how they apply. Okay, so before we get started here, I will ask our agent to describe what this Bicep file does, so we know where we're starting from. And you can see here that you can select the model that you want to use as your base model. So I'm going to use Claude Sonnet 4. So as this is working here, we'll see how the model is able to describe an existing Bicep file. And then next, I will show how the model and the agent tools will help us write Bicep code. So here we can see that it's already invoking one of our tools. It's ran the Bicep the Bicep best practices tool. And we can see which server it's part of. And every MCP tool has both an input and an output. So in this case, it's a null input, so it doesn't require any specific input, and it outputs the same list of Bicep best practices every time this tool is called. So here you can see some basic rules we've defined for resources, some basic naming conventions, some rules that apply to types. Further on, you can see some syntax rules, and we'll continue to update and improve this best practices tool and the rules corresponding with it with your feedback. So please share your feedback on this best practices tool. Now we can see the result of our question to describe what this Bicep file does. We'll see an overview here that this Bicep template deploys a Flask web application with a SQL Server backend. And then it dives into some of the specific infrastructure components and the specific Azure resources defined here. It also shares key features and security considerations, and also outlines the outputs that are provided in this Bicep file. So next up, I want to add a secure key vault resource to my Bicep file. And again, I want to follow best practices for Bicep. We'll call it Bicep best practices. And although I'm referring to the Bicep best practices tool here, you could also prompt it to include any best practices that you prefer in your Bicep authoring, and include that in the prompt to guide the model to author Bicep in your style. So we're going to send this off. And we should see here, again, it's calling some of our tools. So in this case, we see it calling the Get Azure Resource Type Schema tool. So if we click into that, we can see what this tool does. So here it takes as an input our model. Actually, it figures out or reasons as to what this input should be. So as we've defined it as a Key Vault resource, it actually gets the specific Azure name for this Key Vault resource, or Microsoft.keyvault/vaults. And then it shows the API version that it's going to try out here. And here you could actually prompt it to use a specific API version if you had one in mind. And then we can see the output that the model will then ingest again to guide its generation of the code is the Bicep schema for this particular resource. So what this tool does is it provides context to the model so that it can ground itself or base itself in its expected Bicep schema. And this is in an effort to avoid what you may have heard of called hallucination, where a model can make up certain details if it's not familiar with a concept in a prompt. So here, after it's run this tool, it then attempts to generate Bicep according to the output. And you'll see here each step or each output from the model then corresponds to a change in our Bicep file. And we can click on that and see the specific change. Finally, we'll run through and see that it successfully added a secure Azure Key Vault resource. It summarizes the Key Vault features added. It shows us here that it's using secret storage, as it's calling out correctly that secrets and passwords can be very sensitive in your infrastructure, and it outlines the kind of access control that it is enabling. Finally, it shows us a summary of best practices implemented and enhanced security that it took on our behalf. And we see here a final confirmation message that the web app will now securely retrieve the SQL password from the Key Vault at runtime using managed identity, eliminating the need to store sensitive credentials directly in the app configuration. And as a final step, we would want to keep all of these edits after we've reviewed them manually in this code window. And now that we've done that, we can see that our code is up to date with our new Key Vault integration. In this demo, we showed both the Bicep Get Practices tool as well as the Get Azure Resource Type Schema tool, both from the Bicep Experimental MCP server. And you'll notice that we have one last tool that was not invoked by the model, which is the List AZ Resource Types provider. So if you hover over this, you'll see that this tool lists all available resource types for a specific provider, in which case if you prompted towards a provider like storage, this tool would list all of the associated storage resources. But in this case, since we had a more specific prompt towards a Key Vault resource, we were able to, the model was able to skip that step and jump directly to getting the Azure Resource Type Schema. So this is an example of how the way that you prompt actually influences the tools that will be invoked. And you can prompt specifically towards specific tools, or you can prompt generally towards your intended output and have the agent employ the tools that it assesses are necessary for the interaction based on the names and descriptions that we just reviewed. So I hope you have fun playing around with these new MCP tool functionalities. It's still an experimental, so there's a lot to learn on both sides, and we're really looking forward to seeing how you use these tools and hearing your feedback on what could be improved and which tools you want to see next.